Hello and welcome to this video. Today we are going to Belgium, to the Spa-Francorchamps track that is celebrating this year 100 years from its first ever race in this circuit. Alongside with the old Interlagos track, Spa-Francorchamps is my favorite racetrack. It is beloved by millions of racing fans and by almost all drivers. It is a scenic, spectacular place where there is an amazing flow through those corners. Nowadays, it can be explored with high speed on a safe and modern facility. However, it hasn't always been like this. In its original configuration, Spa was a circuit that truly distinguished the men from the boys, as it presented dangers almost like no other circuit, with very fast straights, sweeping corners, all surrounded by trees, telegraph poles, on some places huge drops, and unpredictable weather could combine to create a fatal combination. And, unfortunately, too often did. Anyway, it is the spiritual home of the Belgian Grand Prix. In this video, I am focusing more on the old long circuit. Let's begin. I start this video with a full lap on board the old layout, but first I would like to explain a couple of things, the technology used and about the onboard itself. We live in a digital era where everybody has a phone with a camera ready to shoot anywhere, anytime, anything, almost endlessly. But not so long ago, things were very different. Domestic video cameras only appeared in the 80s and 90s. Before that we had Super 8 film cameras that also had batteries but were limited to 3-minute cartridges. Before that it was even worse, and this is where this was recorded. Unless you had a TV station or a film company behind you, like in one of the displayed footage, you had to use domestic film cameras that had no batteries. They were spring-wound, so they could be used anywhere, anytime, but they were limited to a maximum 30 seconds run on the motor. And then you needed to wind the spring again before being able to shoot again. You were also very limited in time to shoot as the film rolls were short. This explains why the color films have about 20 seconds lacking between every shot. They were winding the spring of the camera. Film cameras were not that common at this time in Europe, so as you can imagine, footage like this is extremely rare. I used the 4 films I know for this onboard lap. There are some little cuts in the original long footage and I tried to cover them, but it's not always possible. If you are unfamiliar with the old layout, we are leaving the current one at Les Combes, the original Les Combes, and we return near the current Stavelot corner going for Blanchimont. You can see some of the corners of the shorter track took the names of the old layout like Les Combes or Stavelot. La Source is there since the first ever race. We are riding with Lucien Bianchi. He was a racing driver and the late Jules Bianchi was his grandnephew. Let's go!
9 miles of ordinary country roads form a triangle that is one of the finest and fastest motor racing circuits in Europe. At the apex of the triangle, the hairpin of La Source and the start of the circuit. To the right, the curve at Bernonville, then Malmedy Corner and the fast Master Straight. At the foot, Stavelot Corner, and finally, past La Carrière and Blanchimont, the difficult climb to La Source and back to the grandstands again. This is the view of the start from the top of the Ridillon with the S-bend of Eau Rouge.
Ici nous sommes à l'Eau Rouge, nous attaquons le Ridillon. Il faut le prendre bien large et couper. À ne pas être déporté. Nous montons maintenant à la côte du haut de Bernaville. il y a l'est dans le bois qu'on prend à fond. On ouvre pour le haut de la côte et le freinage, on arrive maintenant aux 300 mètres et le freinage se fait à peu près entre 200 et 100 mètres. On ouvre bien, on change de vitesse et on plonge à la côte en se laissant déporter. Maintenant, on passe en quatrième et on attaque la descente de Bernaville par un gauche à fond. Et c'est à fond jusqu'à la passerelle. Le freinage se situe à peu près à 100 mètres avant la passerelle. On reste bien large et on entretient le moteur pour ne pas être déporté à l'extérieur. On se laisse glisser à l'extérieur du virage de Bernaville proprement dit et on accélère pour revenir à la côte en gardant l'accélération. Maintenant on est à Malmedy, à l'est de Malmedy. On coupe très court le virage gauche et puis on fait attention de ne pas se faire déporter à l'extérieur dans le virage droit par la mauvaise route. Maintenant on attaque la ligne droite de Masta qui est bien entendu à fond, qui permet la vitesse d'à peu près 250 km/h. C'est toujours la ligne droite de Masta. Nous arrivons aux 300 mètres. Le freinage se situe à peu près entre 200 et 100 mètres. On reste en quatrième et on prend le S de Masta en quatrième très vite, aux environs de 200. Il y a de nouveau la deuxième partie de Masta jusqu'au virage de Hollowell où le freinage est à peu près à 100 mètres. On reste en quatrième pour le premier, le virage, et entre les deux, pour prendre ce tableau, on prend la troisième, et on attaque le tableau en troisième. On est à soin de ne pas se laisser déporter à l'extérieur. Tout de suite après, on attaque la remontée par un premier virage à gauche absolument à fond. Voilà le deuxième virage à gauche qui est également à fond. Et on arrive au fameux virage de carrière. Qui est très délicat parce que la visibilité n'est pas tellement bonne. Il y a encore un virage qui est très vite dans la remontée. Et il y a maintenant la ligne droite de la remontée. Ici, ça permet la vitesse à peu près, presque la même vitesse que pour la descente. Et il y a un léger virage à droite qu'on peut prendre en coupant simplement les gaz. Et puis, on arrive dans le virage gauche, assez difficile, qui précède Blanchimont. Et pour Blanchimont, on doit mettre en troisième, l'ouvrir bien et plonger. Immédiatement après, remettre la quatrième. On arrive au virage Simon, virage du clubhouse, qui s'attaque en troisième. Et au freinage qui se situe à peu près à 150 mètres. Et on attaque la source. La source qui n'est rien de, comment dirais-je, très difficile à cause de la vitesse très réduite. On redescend sur le rouge. on boucle le tour du circuit. Ça s'arrêta devant les stands.
Eh bien voilà Lucien Bianchi qui rentre de son entraînement.
Let's go now for the complete history of the track. Cars were invented in Europe in the late 19th century. Therefore, it is logical that motor racing was also invented here. Being right in the center of Europe, it was no wonder that Belgium was in the front of the new era. Spa is a kind of jet-set town, and several automobile shows and exhibitions were organized there in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Some of the first motor races were also organized around this region, like the Circuit of Ardennes. Motor racing had become increasingly popular in Belgium, and at the end of the First World War, the Chevalier Jules de Thiers, owner of the Liège newspaper La Meuse, was looking for a site to revive the La Meuse Cup, a car race that had been interrupted by World War I from 1914 to 1918. Following a meeting at the Hôtel des Bruyères in Francorchamps in 1921 with the Baron Joseph de Croyer, Burgomaster of Spa, and the racing driver Henri Langlois van Hoffen, I hope I didn't butcher a lot these names with my pronunciation. It was decided that the triangle formed by the routes 32, 23 and 440 made an ideal circuit. They were public roads open to traffic under normal conditions, and they connected Spa-Francorchamps to Malmedy and Stavelot. The combination of long straights and rolling countryside seemed perfect for the new sport, offering the chance to attain high speeds. Attempts were made to organize the first race in 1921, but was cancelled when only one driver entered. The event was thus replaced by a race which gathered together 23 motorbikes and was won by Hassal on a Norton 500cc at an average speed of 90 km per hour. In 1922, the Royal Automobile Club of Belgium organized its Belgian Grand Prix at Francorchamps, an endurance race for cars won by the Baron de Tornaco Bruyère in an Imperia Abadal at an average speed of 89 km per hour. In 1924, after the construction of a timing booth, of a scoreboard and a press stand, the Royal Automobile Club of Belgium organized the first edition of the 24 Hours of Francorchamps, only 1 year after Le Mans. In that year, there were too many fatalities, so riding mechanics were forbidden for 1925 onwards. Racing was particularly dangerous in this era for both spectators and racers. The circuit was first used for Grand Prix racing in 1925 with the European Grand Prix. 7 cars took part in this event, and Alfa Romeo and Antonio Ascari won. His son, Alberto Ascari, would win this race in 52 and 53, but by then it would be on the World F1 Championship. He would become double world champion, and tragically, like his father, he would die with the same age as a result of a crash on a race car. In 1928, the dirt track had tarmac laid down to avoid stones being thrown up. The first course saw the cars head down the hill from La Source to a left-hand bend leading to a hairpin, Virage de Ancienne Douane, named after a former customs post which had occupied the site until 1920. Remember that this area of Europe was very different before World War I. It was Prussian until 1871, German until 1920, and the Eau Rouge was state border and only the right bank was Belgian. Well, after that, the track rose to the top of the mountain and headed out on fast-flowing roads to Malmedy onto Stavelot, before sweeping back to Francorchamps in a roughly triangular course. In the 1933 Belgian Grand Prix, Nuvolari, driving a Maserati for the Scuderia Ferrari, set a lap record of 6 minutes 1 second. That's an average speed of 93 miles per hour, or roughly 150 kilometers per hour, in a killer circuit with skinny tires. Over the years, there were relatively few modifications to the circuit. A chicane at Malmedy was bypassed in 1930, then reused again 4 years later, before being discarded once more in 1939. Following a trend of fast Grand Prix circuits, it was also in 1939 that the circuit's signature corner sequences was born when a connecting road bypassing the Virage d'Ancienne Douane was constructed. The sweeping uphill left-right-left combination became an instant classic. Known popularly but incorrectly as Eau Rouge, this is actually the first corner at the bottom of the hill rather than the one at the top, which is Radion. This fast curve has a steep incline, 17%, and did an enormous contribution to the international reputation of the circuit, and was soon to become the most exciting bend of the calendar. On a small side note, I think that every racing fan remembers the first time one saw it and their first thoughts about it, especially in its old configuration when it was much tighter, slower and feared. I think daunting is an appropriate word for it. It used to create enormous respect among every human being, particularly racers, but not in the modern configuration where it is almost a straight line. It used to be a longer turn to the left and went long near that banking on the left side of the mountain. With its modern configurations, the drivers lost its respect for it and go blindly flat out, and that's what creates the biggest crashes. There were almost no crashes there in the old configuration because drivers had a lot of respect for that corner. Well, unfortunately, Stefan Belov did not. World War II intervened before too long, however, and like many other circuits in Europe, Spa-Francorchamps suffered at the hands of heavy artillery, particularly with the Battle of the Bulge at the end of the war, with the last German counter-offensive before the end of the war. So racing did not resume until repairs were complete in 1947. So, after 7 long years of interruption because of World War II, racing started again with the European Grand Prix of International Formula won by Jean-Pierre Vimille in a Alfa Romeo. If you are still here, most probably you are enjoying this video. So please give it a like. And feel free to subscribe for more content like this. Although this channel is very diversified, sometimes content like this pops up. Several modifications were made at this point. The Malmedy chicane was once again bypassed. The track was enlarged from 6 meter to 9 meter in 1951. Also in that year, and in order to keep the circuit away of the town itself, a new sweeping and banked corner was built at Stavelot. Unlike the Radion, this bend is kind of forgotten and it is a public road nowadays. Both are right-hander sweepers and were built for racing, but one is in the closed circuit for the racers and the other is open for the public. Even then, safety was marginal, sign of those times, as the planet just came from 2 world wars full of death and destruction. The racers did battle on a circuit which was little different from the normal roads used by the public, save for a few strategically placed hay bales. With ever-increasing speeds and no margin for error, death was an inevitable constant. The roll call of fatalities grew frighteningly long. In 1958, Archie Scott Brown crashed and died at the same corner that pre-war Mercedes-Benz driver Dick Simon had perished. Chris Bristow and Alan Stacey were killed in the 1960 Grand Prix. Chris Bristow started in 8th place but was fighting for P6 when he slipped off the road and a barbed wire fence took his life, decapitating him. Alan Stacey started in the last row and was in 7th place when he was hit by a bird and went off. He died instantly. Eric DeKeen and Will Luce in the 1967 Spa 24 Hours, Tony Hagburn and Leo Dernier followed in short order. Even the major stars of the day had serious collisions here. In the fateful 1960 race, Sterling Moss was severely injured in a crash at Bournonville during practice, and it was after a 1965 crash when his BRM ended upside down in the cellar of the farmhouse on the outside of Master Corner that Jackie Stewart began his calls for safety improvements, not only to circuits but to cars, medical facilities and marshalling standards. This would change racing forever. In 1965 and 66 races, there were a lot of accidents. By 1969, Stewart's fellow Grand Prix drivers were largely in agreement and successfully boycotted the Grand Prix when demanded safety improvements had not been carried out. They relented in 1970 when Armco barriers were erected around the circuit, but only after the last-minute installation of a temporary chicane at Malmedy. The Mexican Pedro Rodriguez won the 29th and final Belgian F1 Grand Prix, organized on the long track at an average speed of 241 km per hour. Under the leadership of the champion Jackie Stewart, the F1 Drivers Association then declared that Francorchamps was too dangerous and impracticable. This was the last Grand Prix event on the old course. But despite the dangers, the famous 24-hour race continued, as did visits from sports car series and motorcycle races. During free practice for the 1000 kilometers of Francorchamps, the Frenchman Henri Pescarolo set what remains today a speed record for a lap at the circuit at the wheel of his prototype Matra at an average speed of 262 km per hour. The grim statistics also remained. 2 deaths in 1971, 1 in 1972, 3 during the 1973 24 hours and another 2 in 1975. Some efforts were made to improve safety, although a new chicane installed at the Master Kink in 1975 was judged to be even more dangerous than the original corner and was never raised. Like the chicane of Malmedy, they are still there today and open to the public as parking or rest spaces. It was clear that it was only a matter of time before authorities brought an end to proceedings permanently. Racing could only survive if a safer, shorter and more modern course could be created. The solution came in 1979, when a new section of permanent track was built to create a much shorter 4-mile circuit. This saw the cars turn off the old course before Les Combes, heading down the valley through a fast but technical section before returning to the old course before Blanchimont. The new circuit was a universal hit, retaining its character as one of the most challenging in the world, but with safety margins, which had never been there before. Nevertheless, there was still room for further refinements. In 1981, to slow cars through the old clubhouse corner, a chicane was installed. A slightly clumsily left-right, right-left double corner, it instantly acquired the nickname of the bus stop chicane. 1983 saw the return of Formula One, utilizing brand new F1 only pit facilities on the straight before the bus stop and lassos. There was controversy when the original meeting had to be postponed to later in the year after the track surface broke up. Changes were forced on the circuit following the 1993 crash of Alex Zanardi at Raidillon during Grand Prix practice. The following year, 1994, and after the shock of the loss of Ayrton Senna in a racing crash in Imola previously that year, saw a slow chicane inserted at Eau Rouge, but by the following year the classic layout was back, with much improved runoff areas. Revised pit entry and exit lanes debuted in 2000, with a particularly tortuous route for those using the sports car pits. Before further revisions to the runoff at Eau Rouge and Raidillon necessitated slight track realignments, though without fundamentally altering the natures of the corners. Further changes came in 2004, when the entry to the bus stop chicane was altered. The road diverted in a curving arc to the right before entering a tight left-hander and continuing as before. The change improved runoff but did have the consequence of requiring heavy braking through the curved right-hander and was not universally popular. Spa's future was in doubt by the end of 2005, when further track improvements demanded by Bernie Ecclestone failed to materialize, following the bankruptcy of the race promoter. The race was dropped from the F1 schedule for 2006. The local government stepped in with the necessary funding, allowing the radical rebuilding of the F1 pit facilities for the 2007 season, much more spacious than before. The facilities freed up new land to remodel once again the bus stop chicane. Now a switchback double hairpin with acres of runoff room. It undoubtedly provides an overtaking point, but is a total disruption to the flow of the rest of the circuit. There may be fewer concessions in safety these days, but the resulting circuit changes certainly do have compromises. Other changes, including the lengthening of the main straight to La Source and the sealing off of the former public roads to create a permanent closed racing facility for the first time. Formula One returned, and the race has once again become an annual highlight of the racing season. Nevertheless, safety concerns still remain, with the challenging Eau Rouge and Raidillon section seeing a number of serious crashes occurring in recent years, despite the various track alterations. Indeed, the wider runoff could in some part be contributing to the problem, encouraging drivers to overcommit and run wide, perhaps less fearful of the consequences. Races now regularly see drivers leaving track limits and rejoining the circuit in the path of following cars, creating a new hazard to avoid. Serious collisions have occurred during the FIA World Endurance Championship and Spa 24 Hours in recent years to set alarm bells ringing, culminating with the tragic death of Antoine Hubert in a multi-car collision during the 2019 F2 feature race. In 2019, it was announced that Spa was to be granted a round of the FIM Endurance World Championship from 2022 onwards, necessitating upgrades in order to meet the FIM Grade C standard required. In October 2020, the circuit revealed its €80 million project to renovate key parts of the circuit, including the creation of enlarged runoff areas, some of which see the return of gravel traps, along the addition of a number of new grandstands. Centerpiece of the plans is a brand new grandstand alongside the radio, set to add 4,600 seats, with views over the most iconic portion of the circuit and the endurance racing pit lane. Additional VIP boxes at other key locations and upgrades to the endurance tribune grandstand and adjoining bleachers will bring new seating capacity up by 13,000, doubling the capacity of the track. The full project will take 10 years to complete and is financed by €21 million of the circuit's own funds, a €29.5 million bank loan and a €29.5 million investment by Sogepa, the Walloon government's investment company, which also helps fund the Belgian Formula One Grand Prix. The track layout will remain unaltered for cars, with the new enlarged runoffs featuring gravel traps to be inserted at La Source, the Radio, Blanchimont, Les Combes, and finally Stavelot. This may finally cure some of the headaches caused by track limits controversies, albeit probably keeping trackside marshals busy recovering errant racers. At Turn 9, a new corner will be created to meet the requirements for FIM homologation, while the existing corner will be retained with adapted curbing for car competition. Outside of F1, the circuit has a full calendar of events, including the 24 hours, the FIA World Endurance event for sports cars, and from 2022 a 24-hour race for motorcycles, rounds of the International GT Open, World Rallycross, and a popular historic meeting, the Spa 6 Hours. With a total of 18 Grand Prix victories, 4 more than McLaren, Ferrari is the team with the most wins in the Belgian Grand Prix, and that is not a surprise, as they participate since the start of the F1 Championship in 1950, but sometimes forgotten, they were winning there by preparing cars for other brands. If you remember, before in this video, in the 1933 Grand Prix, I mentioned that it was won by Nuvolari driving a Maserati, run by the Scuderia Ferrari. The story is this. The Belgian Grand Prix, the third major international Grand Prix of the year, attracted almost the entire elite of international drivers. Discontent with the way the team was preparing his Alfa Romeo car and wishing to test the Maserati, Nuvolari ended preferring it. The deal he had with Enzo Ferrari allowed it. The race became the sole triumph for the unequaled Nuvolari in the monoposto Maserati, which he had modified between practice and the race. Driving a Maserati for the first time, he led the entire race, except for 3 laps during mid-race when he had to stop for fuel and tires. Chiron and Borzacchini dropped out, while Varzi and Dreyfus were clearly left behind the inspired Nuvolari, who proved once again that at 40 years of age he was still Europe's best driver. So, despite technically being entered by Scuderia Ferrari, who officially ran Alfa Romeo cars, in 1933 Nuvolari drove for them a Maserati, which did not feature the team's prancing horse logo. I love racing histories like this, and I'm pretty sure I have missed a lot of stuff in order to keep this video as short as possible. If you know similar racing stories in Spa, let us know in the comments section. I'm sure lots of people are interested in them. And now we go for some of the most famous crashes in Spa, and some rare ones too. Richard Seaman lost his life while leading the 1939 race in the rain at the clubhouse corner. Currently, you know it as the beginning of the start-finish straight. He was an amazing driver who never got any recognition among the British, even today. Something I really don't understand, as he went to Germany not to fight in a war, but in pursuit of his dream, racing in the best cars of the day. In 1956, Stirling Moss had his first encounter with danger in Spa, when he lost a wheel at the top of Radion and nearly went off. Just look at that huge drop. You see a runoff area there today. Archie Scott Brown lost his life in this horrible crash that demonstrates the dangers drivers found when they went off the road. They were basically condemned. The hail bales as a protection is a joke, as they also caught fire and made it even worse. In 1960, Stirling Moss was severely injured after this crash in Bournonville, but he won the next race he entered in Riverside. I did a video about that track, the link is in the description. Chris Bristow slipped off the road also in Bournonville, jumped on the bank, and a barbed wire fence that was about 10 meters away took his life, decapitating him. Also in 1960, Alan Stacey started in the last row but was fighting for 7th place when he was hit by a bird in the Mazda King and went off. He died instantly. In 1966, Joe Bonnier had this spectacular crash in the rain, and this is the recreation in the movie Grand Prix. This was also the year Jackie Stewart had this terrible crash, where he ended upside down, trapped inside the car, soaked in fuel for half an hour. In 1967, Mike Parks had a career-ending crash at Blanchimont. Just terrible. In 1983, now in the short track, Manfred Winkelhock lost a wheel and had this crash in one of the fastest corners. Fortunately, that wheel did fly away from the spectators. Just look at those wood posts to slow cars down. In 1985, Stefan Belov died after trying to overtake Jackie X on a factory Porsche from the outside at Eau Rouge and paid the ultimate price. He hit the Armco in an area where there was a major supporting post that was buried 2 meters below the ground, and it simply didn't move. Gerhard Berger completely destroyed that beautiful McLaren in the qualifying of 1992 in the rain after aquaplaning. But he didn't hurt himself, and that's what really matters. Also in 1992, this is the famous scene where Eric Comas had a terrible crash at Blanchimont and blacked out with his foot on the accelerator. Senna risked his own life by stopping his car, the only driver who did that, and helping the other fellow driver, turning off the engine and supporting his head. He arrived there first, even before the marshals. He stood there with the medics, learning another lesson, and received the applauses of the few spectators that were in that area. Stefano Modena hit Martin Brundle, also in that qualifying. If you lose it in the rain, even now, Spa is really dangerous. Crazy young Alex Zanardi tested the barriers of Radion in 1993 and completely destroyed his car, and that year for him. Senna, coming fast from behind, didn't expect a completely blocked track and did not slow enough, also crashing, but without any major issues for him or for the marshals. This crash started the changes in Eau Rouge and Radion. Tom Christensen lost it in Blanchimont in a F3000 race in 1997, and it ended causing one of the biggest mass collisions ever in Spa. You had to be very lucky if your car was still in one piece after passing there. And if you think it is over, it is just beginning. Almost the whole field crashed there. This was a serious crash, and it started ringing bells in the authorities. In 1998, Villeneuve crashed hard in Radion, but he did even worse next year when he challenged his teammate to do it flat out, and both crashed hard just minutes from each other. Just like the year before in F3000, F1 also destroyed the whole field on a race in 1998. It just takes one car to go off and all the others followed the lead. In 2001, Luciano Burti cheated death by surviving this high-speed crash in the Blanchimont corner. More recently, in 2012, Fernando Alonso also cheated death by centimeters when he was not hit in the head by the Flying Lotus of Romain Grosjean. Unlucky Antoine Hubert lost his life in a freak accident in the top of Radion in a multiple car crash in an F2 race in 2019. And weeks ago in 2021 in the 24 hours race, a very similar crash involving several cars and a lot of carbon fiber to clean. What a mess. Remember that 60 years ago it was just a huge drop, and it makes me think if that wouldn't be better. Who would go flat out with that drop in there? And this is it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, subscribe for more videos like this, and drop a line in the comments section if you have something to say or ask. I see you in the next video. Take care.
Who had problems on that Saturday afternoon was Martin Brundle and Stefano Modena. They used to be teammates, but Brundle, who turned in, minding his own business, and then Modena, who lost control, just spun straight into the back of him.
He said sorry, so what else can you say? I mean, he just lost it under braking. You're not looking in your mirrors as you're trying to turn into La Source, especially in those conditions, and I just at this last second I saw a blue flash in my right-hand mirror. But by then he was coming at me with amazing speed. I couldn't believe the closing speed. I guess it just shows you how powerful the carbon brakes are, how much they slow the car down, because he slowed down nearly nothing going backwards, huh?